Hi, everyone. The story that we're reading this week is called The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lessmore by William Joyce. So, this was actually a movie and was so successful it won an Academy Award. It was an animated short film, and they ended up making a book out of it. That doesn't happen very often. The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lessmore. Usually it's books they turn into movies, not the other way around. Morris Lessmore loved words. He loved stories. He loved books. His life was a book of his own writing, one orderly page after another. He would open it every morning and write of his joys and sorrows, of all that he knew and everything that he hoped for. But every story has its upsets. One day the sky darkened, the winds blew and blew, till everything Morris knew was scattered, even the words of his book. He didn't know what to do or which way to go, so he began to wander and wander. Then a happy bit of happenstance came his way. Rather than looking down, as had become his habit, Morris Lessmore looked up. Drifting through the sky above him, Morris saw a lovely lady. She was being pulled along by a festive squadron of flying books. Morris wondered if his book could fly, but it couldn't. It would only fall to the ground with a depressing thud. The flying lady knew Morris simply needed a good story, so she sent him her favorite. The book was an amiable fellow and urged Morris to follow him. Now, if you can see who that book is, I think you probably know him. The book led him to an extraordinary building where many books apparently nested. Morris slowly walked inside and discovered the most mysterious and inviting room he had ever seen. It was filled with the fluttering of countless pages, and Morris could hear the faint chatter of 1,000 different stories, as if each book was whispering an invitation to adventure. Then his new friend flew up to him and landed on his arm. It held itself open, as if hoping to be read. The room rustled to life. And so Morris's life among the books began. Morris tried to keep the books in some sort of order, but they always mixed themselves up. The tragedies needed cheering up and would visit with the comedies. The encyclopedias, weary of facts, would relax with the comic books and fictions. All in all, it was an agreeable jumble. Morris found great satisfaction in caring for the books, gently fixing those with fragile bindings and unfolding the dog-eared pages of others. There he is. He's a book doctor. Sometimes Morris would become lost in a book and scarcely emerge for days. Morris liked to share the books with others. Sometimes it was a favorite that everyone loved, and other times he found a lonely little volume whose tale was seldom told. Everyone's story matters, said Morris, and all the books agreed. You see what's happening to people as they get their books? At night, after all the stories that needed telling had been told and everyone had settled down to their proper places on the shelves, the great big dictionary would get in the last words. It was then that Morris Lessmore would once again write in his own book. He wrote of his joys and sorrows, of all that he knew, and everything that he hoped for. The days passed, so did the months. And then years and years. You can see it, Morris Lessmore is starting to get a little older. And Morris Lessmore became stooped and crinkly. But the books never changed. Their stories stayed the same. Now his old friends took care of him the way he had once cared for them, and they read themselves to him each night. Then one day he filled the last page in his book. He looked up and said with a bittersweet sigh, "I guess it's time for me to move on." The books were sorry, but they understood. Morris put on his hat and took his cane. As he went to the door, he turned and smiled, then waved goodbye. "I'll carry you all in here," he said, and pointed to his heart. The books waved their pages, and Morris Lessmore flew away. And as he flew, he changed back to the way he'd been that long ago day when they'd all first met. He's young again. The books were quiet for a while. Then they noticed that Morris Lessmore had left something behind. "It's his book," said his oldest friend. Inside was Morris's story, all of his joys and sorrows, all that he knew and everything that he hoped for. Then the books heard a small, expectant sound. There in the doorway was a little girl. She looked around with wonder. Then something fantastic happened. Morris Lessmore's book flew up to her and opened its pages. Then the girl began to read. And so our story ends as it began, with the opening of a book. The end. I like that story a lot. And I think it's a good one to be reading our first week with all this crazy stuff that's going on, because the author, William Joyce, who wrote the movie and wrote the book, actually was inspired in part by Hurricane Katrina and how that threw everything into chaos and how books were a comfort after that happened. And we aren't dealing with a hurricane right now, but with the coronavirus, we are dealing with a lot of chaos. And I think it's a good reminder that some things are still the same. We still have books. We're going to be okay. All right. I'll see you all next week.